Hello. Today we'll be looking at installing and setting up a VirtualBox Virtual Machine on a Windows 10 host system. We will also be installing Windows 10 as our guest OS, but you can utilize VirtualBox to install other guest systems such as Linux and Mac as well. You can even install VirtualBox on other host systems such as Linux and install Windows as a guest OS. Some of these different scenarios will be covered in other videos, but the overall concepts are the same. Today's demonstration will be to simply install another virtualized instance of Windows 10 on our host system. This can be to simply learn about virtual machines in general, or more often to create a separate test sandbox area on your PC that you can use to test different settings or programs without the risk of corrupting or infecting your host computer. This video will walk you step by step of setting up a VirtualBox virtual machine on your computer and using it to install a fresh Windows 10 VM installation. Before we start though, I want to quickly go over a few items. First, I want to go over some requirements. To follow along with this guide, you should have a hard drive or a solid state drive preferred that has at least 200 GB free. External drives can work, but they will be much slower. Another requirement is a multi-core CPU, with 4+ cores preferred. Can work with less, like a 2-core, but again this will be much slower. RAM 8 GB is preferred. It can work with as little as 4 GB, but as always, more is better. High-speed internet connection. Depending on if you already have access to the guest OS images, this may not be such a high priority. But in this video, we're going to actually download the Windows 10 image, so the higher the speed of your internet connection, the better. I also want to cover a couple of key terms to make following this guide a little bit easier. VM is short for virtual machine, which is a general term describing a computer environment that is virtualized. VB is short for the VirtualBox software that we're going to be using to create and run our VMs or virtual machines. The host system is the physical PC that you're probably using right now that you intend to install the VirtualBox software on to run the virtual guest machine. Guest. The guest system then is a virtual machine that you'll be running within the VB software, in this case the virtual Windows 10 system that we'll be creating. So to start with, we're going to need to get a copy of Windows 10 installation ISO. So to do that, go ahead and navigate to the Microsoft.com software site shown here. You can simply go to Google and type in Windows 10 download tool, and that should give you a search result for this page. Under the Create Windows 10 Installation Media section, go ahead and click on Download To Now. And you can just save the file. Once this is completed, just go ahead and open up your Downloads folder. And you can go ahead and double click on the exe to begin the process. If you get a prompt from Windows asking if you want to allow the program to make changes on your computer, go ahead and click on Yes. As you can see, a dialog is going to appear for a few minutes as the tool prepares to get things ready. After a few moments, the Windows 10 Setup License Agreement should appear. Go ahead and read through, and if you agree to the terms, click on Accept. Again, there may be a slight pause as the tool continues to prepare. Then the tool is going to present you with some options. Upgrade this PC now or create installation media. This is the second option that we want because we want to create the ISO file. Go ahead and make sure that's selected and click on Next. And usually the defaults will be acceptable. If for some reason you do need to change these settings, you can uncheck the box and then choose, whichever language or whatever. But in our case, the defaults are adequate. So go ahead and click Next. And then the tool asks us what type of media we wish to create. In our case, we're going to use the ISO file. Select that and click on Next. Then you just choose the location where you want to store the image. In my case, I'm just going to store it on an empty SSD that I installed for this purpose. We're just going to call it Windows. You can name it whatever you want, but I'm going to call it Windows 10 with the ISO extension. Then after a few seconds, the process will begin. Once the process is completed, you'll get a screen saying burn the ISO file to a DVD. In this case, we're not worried about that. We just want the ISO file image on our computer. So we can just go ahead and click on Finish. And if we go to our download location, we can see we have the Windows 10 ISO. In this case, it's about 4.2 gigabyte in size, so make sure you have adequate space. Okay, for the next step, we're going to need VirtualBox software from Oracle. Again, you can just go ahead and Google VirtualBox, and you should find the link to the virtualbox.org website. Latest version is VirtualBox 6.1, so go ahead and click on VirtualBox 6.1. And in this video, I'm using a Windows 10 host, so click on the Windows 10 host link. And again, you can just click on Save File. Once the download is complete, go ahead and open up your Downloads folder. And again, double click on the exe to launch the installer program. Now, welcome to Oracle VM VirtualBox 6.12 Setup Wizard. You can go ahead and click on Next. On this screen, we can accept the defaults for now. The only thing you might want to change is the installation. In my case, I think I'm going to change it to my new E drive. Then the next screen, we can just go ahead and accept all the defaults. And here's a little bit warning saying that your network interface might blink as it installs. Go ahead and click on Yes. And just a summary, go ahead and click on Install. And if Windows prompts you, if you want to allow the application to make changes to your computer, go ahead and click on Yes. When that finishes up, it should give you a little dialog saying that it's finished. We'll just go ahead and start the Oracle VM VirtualBox after installation. Click on Finish. Close out these other screens here to make it easier to see. Here we go. Here we got the Oracle VM VirtualBox Manager window. Right now we don't have anything installed on our computer. We just have the framework where we can actually create a virtual machine with. So to do that, we'll go ahead and click on New. We'll give it a name. I'm just going to call mine Win10. Then you want to select the folder where you want to install it. Again, I'm going to move mine from the default and move it to my E drive. I'll just make a new folder. Win10, the folder name, and of course we're going to use Windows 10 in this example. As you can see, we can select different versions of Windows if we want. Go ahead and click on Next. And here we get to select how much memory that we want our guest OS to have. And this will be based on how much physical memory you have. My host has 8 gigabytes on it. As you can see here in the slider, it allows you to adjust how much you want. But notice down here in the green, once you start getting outside the green into like the red, the orange here and the red, that's because it's cautioning you that if you use too much memory that your host system won't have enough left for its own process. So you want to stay within this range. Myself, I find that roughly half of your host physical memory works out pretty good. I'm going to use 4 gigabyte of memory in this case since my host system has 8 gigabyte of memory. So select your memory, go ahead and click on Next. The hard disk is going to be a virtualized section on your current hard drives that your guest system is going to think is its actual hard disk. So here we can just go ahead and create a virtual disk now. The recommended minimum size is 50 gig, but I like going a little bit larger than that. We'll go ahead and just click on Create. And here for this example, we're just going to select the default VDI VirtualBox disk image. Go ahead and click on Next. And here it gives you 2 choices, dynamically allocated or fixed size. As the dialog does show, a fixed size will give you a little bit more performance boost, but I like to use dynamically allocated. That way it actually only uses as much space in my hard drive that the guest OS needs. So even though I create a 120 gigabyte hard drive for it, it won't necessarily use all that space until it needs to. So depending on how much space you have set aside and what your intention is for the virtual machine, you can make whichever one suits your needs better. I'm just going to go ahead and leave it at dynamically allocated for this example. Go ahead and click next. And here's where we can actually size it. I'm going to install it within our image folder that I created earlier, which is fine. It's where I want this image to be. And here we can size how much space we want. Like I said, I want to go roughly, and you can just type it in here too. I just want to go roughly about 120 gigabyte. So once you set your hard disk image size, go ahead and click on Create. Back to the main VirtualBox Manager window. So we've actually created a virtualized bare metal equivalent of a computer. So this is just like we went to the store and bought a computer with 4 gigabyte of memory and 120 gigabyte hard drive. So before we actually install the image, there's a couple other settings I'd like to go over. So I'll go ahead and click on Settings. And this will open the settings panel for the virtual machine we just created. In general, you can just verify the name we gave it. It's going to be used for Microsoft Windows. And we plan on installing Windows 10 64-bit version. These others don't have to worry about for now. Go down to System. Here again, you can confirm the memory we chose. If you wanted something different, you can change it here again. In boot order, I don't plan on using a floppy, so I'm going to uncheck floppy. But do leave optical and hard drive checked, because we'll need optical when we actually install Windows, and hard drive, of course, just like a computer, it's the hard drive, the virtual hard drive that the image is going to use. You can leave the chipset and pointing devices. This is actually the pointing device. Why don't we change the PS2 mouse? Everything else you can leave the same here. Under processor, here you can adjust cores. On the box I'm using for this demonstration, I have 4 cores. But here we can change it. Again, the same thing with memory. It kind of shows you, like if you're going to execute or exceed too much of the capacity of your physical computer, that's going to get into orange here and warn you. So the best practice again is about use half the cores of your physical CPUs. In this case, since I have 4 cores, I'm just going to use 2, allow 2 for the VirtualBox. The execution cap, you can leave at 100%, but the only time you'd want to lower that is, say if you were on a 2 or 1 core system, you'd want to reserve a little bit of processing power for your host. But in our case, we have 2 cores that will still be free for the host, so we should be fine. The rest of the features here we can leave at their defaults. Acceleration, don't worry about that. We can OK out of this. Actually, let's go down to display and give it the maximum amount of video memory. It's only 128 megabyte, and that will allow you more resolutions. Also, make sure that VBox SVGA is actually enabled. There's a couple different choices in here, but this will give you the highest resolutions available. Don't have to worry about enable 3D acceleration, as we're not going to be playing games on a virtual machine or using too many things that are going to require 3D acceleration. And again, the rest of this stuff, just leave it default. Storage is probably the next important area we need to look at. Here we can see we have our hard drive set aside, the 120 gigabytes that I created. And right now you can see the actual size. This is because it's dynamically allocated. So right now we're only using 2 megabytes of our true physical storage. That's why I prefer this method. So where we need to modify is go here to empty. This is the optical disk drive. Just think it was a DVD player or CD player on your computer. And we're going to want to point this to our Windows 10 image that we just downloaded. So make sure this is selected. Come over here to this next disk icon. Click on it. Then just choose a disk file. Then here you can navigate to where you stored your image. Here I just stored it on my E drive, Windows 10 ISO. Select that, click on open. As you can see, now it's just like that DVD is installed in our virtual computer. And everything else, audio, And audio, we don't have to worry about. It's enabled. It's just going to use my host system audio. Network, make sure that the enable network adapter is checked so you have internet connection and attached to NAT. That's how it's going to actually connect to your host system to get out to the rest of the world. Everything else should be fine. We'll cover shared folders once we get the image set up. But for now, that should be everything. Like I said, the important thing that you're going to need to do out of all that is make sure that you change this to point to your Windows ISO image that we downloaded earlier. Once we're done, go ahead and click on OK. And now that we have it set up to boot from the optical drive, we can go ahead and click on Start. Okay, and sometimes you get a little warning here. Select the optical disk. Since we want our Windows 10, we can go ahead and click on Start there. And you also may get some warnings here about your keyboard options turned on. We can just go ahead and dismiss them. Usually what that means is once your mouse or keyboard activities within it is captured by the guest OS, and to get out of that, as it shows down here, if for some reason you're trapped in there and you can't do anything in your host, if you hit the right control key on your keyboard, that will break out. And again, you get a dialog here saying pretty much as such. You just uncheck the do not show message again. And here we are. So we're at the Windows setup portion. These will probably by default be okay, like mine set up for English United States. So all that is fine. So go ahead and confirm those. Then you can click on next. Then we want to install now. And after a couple of moments, you'll get to activate Windows. If you have a product key, you can go ahead and type that in now if you plan on this being a permanent VM installation. Otherwise, you can just click here where it says I do not have a product key. And since we didn't enter a key, if you did enter a key, it would automatically select which operating system we're going to install based on what the key is valid for. In our case, I'm just going to install Windows 10 Pro, so select that. Click on Next. And again, we'll get a Windows license agreement, so go ahead and read through that. And if you agree to everything, check the box, I accept the license terms, and click on Next. And here we're going to want to choose the lower setting since this is a new installation, just like we're installing on a real computer. Click the lower instance, and that will bring up this next window. And again, since we have unallocated space of a virtual 120 gigabyte hard drive, that's where we want to install it. That selects automatically, so go ahead and click on Next. And here we go, we're starting to install the actual OS. And depending on if you're using a solid state drive or hard drive or an external drive, this can take anywhere from a few minutes up to maybe 20 or 30 minutes. Once all the files have been copied over, at some point your VM is going to reboot just like it would with a real computer if you're installing Windows for the first time. And again, this will take a couple minutes as it gets things ready behind the scenes. Okay, now we're back and set up. On my system using a solid state drive, only took about 3 or 4 minutes. So again, depending on your system, I've seen external drives take 20-30 minutes. So keep that in mind when you pick which disk drive you want to install on. Anyway, then Windows Setup's just going to ask us some more basic questions. So like in this case, I'm in the United States. So that is correct. Go ahead and click on Yes. Again, your keyboard, that's fine. No, I don't want to do that, so I'm going to skip. And you'll get to a screen, depending if you're in an organization or just at home user. I'm just going to use the setup for personal use here for this demonstration. So click on that, click on Next. And here you can sign in with a Microsoft account if you have one. But since this is just a VM installation, I'm just going to go ahead and create an offline account. And again, Windows likes to ask you again, but we'll use limited experience, which just basically lets us create an offline account. And here you can give it a name. You can use your own name or whatever you want. In my case, I'm just going to use something like VM user since this is just a demonstration instance. So click whatever username you want, click on next. And you can give it a password here. In my case, I'm just going to leave the password blank. This is a demonstration. And depending on your needs, this may or may not be a wise decision. If you plan to use this VM for any sensitive data, obviously you're going to want to secure the password, just like you would a physical machine. But if you're just playing around or using it as a sandbox or something, you don't really need a password, since somebody would have to have access to your physical machine to access your virtual machine. So it's whatever you think is best. I'm just going to leave it blank to make it a little bit easier to sign in. Just go ahead and click on next. Then it's going to ask us a series of more questions. I typically answer no to these, especially on a VM. Decline. And I normally just go through and uncheck all this. Go ahead and accept that. And after a few more minutes of setting up, you should finally be presented with your VM desktop. One thing I like to do right away is test it, make sure the internet functionality is working. Because it's actually going to use a NAT, network address translation address, through your host PC to get to the internet. And of course, first time and all this, we get a lot more prompts than usual. Just go ahead and click on Google and search for bacon. And we can see we're actually on the internet, so that's a good deal. And the second thing we might want to do is change the display settings. In our case, it's about a medium resolution. We can bump that up a little bit. I don't want to get too big so it gets off my other machine here, but that looks pretty good for now. And one thing I will point out, if you're on a 4K monitor, until we install the guest additions, you may have trouble resizing it. But otherwise, if you're on a smaller monitor, you should be fine. And another thing you'll notice here in the actual VirtualBox Manager, you get kind of a little preview of your VM. We don't actually have to keep this running, so we can actually minimize that out or just close it out totally. And one thing you can do if you would like to, let's open that up again. We can actually create a shortcut of this here. Just click on create shortcut on desktop. Here we go. Then instead of having to open up the VM VirtualBox, we can just go ahead and use this shortcut to go directly into our Windows 10 VM. Alright, with the resolution set up, the next thing I usually like to do is install the Guest Edition CD. You see this outer frame here, that's the VirtualBox window. We can actually hide that, but for this initial setup, I like to leave it open because we'll need to do some various functionality with it. But for now, I just want to insert the Guest Editions CD image, which you can find up in the window part. Go to Devices, then towards the bottom. What the Guest Editions does is add some functionality to our guest system that allows us to use shared folders. And with 4K monitors, I think it improves the device driver a little bit so you can have higher resolutions. So if you are on a 4K monitor and we're having issues trying to resize it to a decent resolution size, try it once we install the Guest Editions. So I basically inserted the CD by doing this, insert Guest Editions CD image. Now if you open up Windows Explorer within your Guest OS, and you may notice my mouse is kind of funky. That is one drawback with using a VM. As you move the mouse from within to outside the window, it takes a little bit for the mouse to sync up again. So just kind of be aware of that. But within the Guest OS, if you expand my PC, now you can see that our optical drive is we have a actual CD installed in the drive, VirtualBox Guest Additions. Just go ahead and double click on that. And with that, you'll see several programs. And the one that we want is the VBox Windows Additions. Don't worry about the AMD 64. Depending on whichever version you have, this one here will automatically detect it. Just go ahead and double click on that to run it. It's going to ask if you want to install it. Go ahead and click on yes and just follow the prompts through. Click next. One thing I will point out, this is actually the destination folder within our Guest OS. So this ain't on your host OS. This is actually part of that 120 gigabyte that I allocated for it. Just accept the defaults here. Click on next. Again, accept everything. Click on install. And it may prompt you to for device driver install. Go ahead and click on install. And once the installation is complete, it's going to prompt you to reboot now. Just go ahead and click on reboot now. And after a minute or two, you should be back into your guest OS. Now we can set up shared folders. So to do that, again, go up to devices, click on shared folders, and shared folders settings. It opens up a new dialog here. So go ahead over here and click on the folder with the little green plus sign next to it. And in folder path, if you click the drop down and select other, this will take us to our actual host system. And here you can put the shared folders wherever you want. Again, I'm just going to kind of put everything on the E drive here. I'm going to create a new folder, and I'm just going to call it VM shared, something like that. And we want to be able to read and write from both. We also want to auto mount it. Mounting is just, it's going to map like a network drive to it when the instance reboots, and also make permanent. So if you're just doing something temporary, you wouldn't have to check that. But since we want this to be available on successive reboots, we'll set it up this way. So, and you can give it whatever name you want. I'm just going to leave it at VM shared. And don't worry about the mount point. That's just in case you wanted to mount it somewhere else, say like a G drive or something. I think by default it uses Z or something like that, but that's fine. So you can just make sure everything's set up like this for now. Click on OK. Then it gives you a little summary. Click on OK again. Now if we open up our Explorer again, expand my PC, you can see that we do have the shared folder, again mapped as Z drive. Okay, and to test out our new shared folder, we can just double click on that to open it up. If you right click somewhere in the empty spot, just click on new text document. We can just type something like maybe test for now. Then if you get out of there and go back to our host system, and we open up the Explorer, we scroll down to our E drive, to our shared folder, we can actually see the test document. There's nothing in there. We can just put some gibberish in there. File, save. And again, we go back into our VM here. Now we open it up. You can see the gibberish. So for the most part, they're pretty much separated, but through the shared folder that we just created, you got an easy way to transfer folders, files, images, whatever you want back and forth between the host and the virtual system. One thing I will caution though, if you did set this up as a sandbox to like install and test unknown software, say you're scared it might be infected with a virus, or you're just playing around the settings and stuff like that to see how an OS reacts, you may not want to set up the shared folders just to further kind of protect your host system from any danger and damage. But for the most part, if you're just using it, say as a, maybe plan on programming on here or do some other type of work, shared folders is a nice, easy way to get your files and data back and forth. And at some point, you're going to want to make a snapshot of this current state of the machine in case at some future point it became corrupted. Or again, if you were going to be using this as a sandbox to test unknown programs, that would be a good time to snapshot it just so you can return it to the condition it's at right now. So to do that, you can go ahead and up here and click on Machine, and then click on Take Snapshot. And you can give it a name. By default, it's Snapshot 1. I usually like to give it a name like initial image or something like that, just to indicate that, you know, it's the initial state. And give it a description. You'd probably want to put more in here later on, but for now, just to give us a base point. And it should save the machine state. And that way, if we ever have to recover back to this point, we don't have to do all that work over again. Okay, so now I think that's about all for this video. To power off a machine, just like you would a real machine, you can shut down. And depending on your processor speed and how much memory and that, depends on how long them operations take. Again, we can use our shortcut here to launch the machine directly. Just give a quick demonstration of that. On this particular machine, it's a little bit sluggish. I got only 4 cores, but it's still pretty snappy. Okay, and then we're back in it. Power down again. And I'll just open up the VM VirtualBox Manager again. Okay, one last thing I'm going to show you in case that you did need to restore a previous version or to your snapshot image. If you click on your image here, then click on over here, you got little snapshots. And here we got, okay, here's the current state, and here's the initial image snapshot that we took. If you click on initial image here and you right click on it, you can restore, or you can select it up here and restore it. And that will actually set it back to our snapshot. And if you get a few of them later on, say you make several of them, you can again use this interface to delete them. But that should be all for this video. I'll do a couple more videos on installing a Linux example and maybe using a Linux system to install Windows image. But for now, that's it. I'll see you in the next video.